Hello and welcome to Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction, brought to you by the Modular Building Institute. Welcome everyone. My name is John McMullen. I'm the marketing director here at MBI. Today I'm joined by Peter DeMaria and Diego Rivera of Mid-Rise Modular. Among other things, Peter and Diego are here to talk about the modular building design process and what younger designers should know about being part of a modular project team. Peter and Diego, welcome.
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
Tell me about yourself, Peter. We'll start with you. What's your background and how did you get started in modular architecture?
Thanks, John. Started out in architecture school. If I really want to go back far, I was able to meet Buckminster Fuller when I was a young fella.
Oh, wow.
And I was in undergraduate school, was in art school, swore I'd never be an architect because my brother was in architecture school, working his tail off every night. And I was out having fun at artist parties in New York, right? But it all changed when I had a great professor. And I think that's happened often for many people. There's always a mentor or professor out there that really changes the way you view the world. And at that point, I was able to meet Bucky Fuller, and it was quite inspirational. It put me on a different path. I went off to architecture school at the University of Texas in Austin, and then migrated west to Los Angeles. I opened my own architectural practice and did primarily traditional work. Got to about 2003, 2004, got frustrated with the cost of things and started to explore. I was teaching at that time, took a year sabbatical, and really went around the world to see what was an alternative way of building that wasn't stopping me, much from where the traditional wood frame construction was doing. And I unveiled, the cargo container as having the most potential, but the least amount of research had been done on it. So I was really fortunate, had some great clients in 2005, and built what I believe is the first legal cargo container based building in the United States. It was a two-story residence down in Redondo Beach. And that kind of set me up on an alternative path, the traditional architectural practice that I had. And I really leveraged out what you could do with that container. And the next logical jump was to move into the world of modular. And once I got into steel modular, I understood all the benefits of it. And I've not looked back. And right now, Diego and I have come together, and I think we're creating something that's really going to serve the masses. We think we've come upon something that's really valuable, and we want to share it. We want to bring it out there to the world and have the most amount of impact on the people who need housing and a great housing solution most. So that was like 30 years in a nutshell. All right, so now I find myself here in Los Angeles, and I travel back and forth from Austin, Texas to LA. And Diego and I have been actually working parallel to each other for the last almost 2 decades, but we didn't know that we were in each other's backyards until we met, thanks to the Modular Building Institute at the World of Modular about a year and a half or so ago, and we've been doing fantastic ever since.
Well, that's an amazing background. Thank you, Peter. Diego, tell me about yourself and your background.
Oh my God, that's interesting when you go after Peter. So let's see if I can do better than that. I'm gonna give it a try. Same thing, learn on the hard way. Went to architecture school, became an architect. Went to school here in LA called SciArc. After I graduated, I realized that after $150,000, $200,000 in debt, there was nothing in my brain besides a big ego of a bunch of architects who teach me how to do things. So I took a year sabbatical and went through all the trades. As a Latino living in California, took advantage of the color of my skin and got jobs mopping roofs, installing drywall, doing light gauge. And I would go to every job, hey, dame un trabajo. So I'll get a trabajo, I get a job, work my way in. After a week, especially mopping roofs, it's like, hey, I know how to read plans. Okay, come to the office. So then you're becoming an estimator. Couple of weeks in, a month on, and it was like, hey, listen, I actually went to architecture school. I'm just learning the trades. Thank you for the opportunity. And worked my way out about a year through all the trades until I learned about light gauge. So within that process, that journey, I got hired by a fiber cement manufacturer in Latin America to go preach fiber cement with light gauge across the world. So I was like the young architect who graduated in the United States, going to third world countries, utilizing framing systems with a substrate, which was a fiber cement. So that took me to a journey of about 10, 15 years, where I got to learn a lot about manufacture, ISO 9000, ISO 14000, and all the qualifications that those big manufacturers have. 10 years into that, got married, got kids, decided to come back to the States, mom and dad, and everybody was here. So came back to the States, kept working for the fiber cement manufacturer, working on ICC, doing architecture inspections, writing the code, everything that has to do with fiber cement and light gauge. And then about 14 years ago, somebody told me that there was a guy in Southgate putting a panel shop that he may need help. So I step in, start working, got into the 2D world that we call it, panel world, and been doing light gauge panels, low bearing type 1 construction in the California market for over 14 years. But like Peter said, about a year ago, I said, you know what, this is easy, because we're building for DPR, for all the general contractors, the big guys, the $1 billion GCs. And then I said, you know what, I want to see what happens when you put this together and you do a volumetric thing. So went to the world of modular, met Peter right there. And we took on the challenge of generate mid-rise. I've been a steel guy all my life. I have never built a house in wood. That's why we choose mid-rise, complying with codes and everything else. We want to go about 5 stories where we're not competing against wood. It's impossible to compete price-wise. They're 2 different products. I think every system has its place in this industry. And as an industry, we should be helping each other. And that's the journey that we're on right now. Create 2 lines of divisions. We still have a light gauge panels where we're very successful here in California, and that pays the bills. And now we're taking a couple modular jobs where now we're grabbing those 2D panels and building them into a 3D unit.
Very good. Both of you have, it sounds like, extensive backgrounds in traditional construction, traditional design. What challenges did you both face when you first started tackling modular projects? What was your biggest hurdle?
Gosh, believe it or not, I don't think we satisfied those challenges until I connected with Diego a year and a half or so ago. It didn't matter how well I could draw, how well I could design, how detailed my drawings were. At the end of the day, someone had to fabricate this. And as an architect, the architect now is working with the client and it convinces the client, say, hey, let's go into the modular space. So at that point, you have to be able to deliver a modular fabricator or a team that is going to execute. Okay. In the traditional world, I can go out there and get 3 or 4 bids, right? And then interview everybody. And by the end of the day, there's some strong predictability there. You're going to find a reputable builder who's going to do a decent job.
The beautiful thing about what we're doing with Peter is I keep telling Peter, you dream, I'll build it. You dream where those walls go. You dream the architecture. Let me take care of what happens inside those walls. So building what's inside the walls is the secret. And coming from the 2D world, the panels and the connections and the different inspections that you have on a low-bearing job, 9 stories, 6 stories, incorporating that into your MEP paths, your mechanicals and everything else, it is challenging to understand how boxes are. But when we come from the panel world, when we pre-manufacture panels before foundations are already been poured, it's been a game changer of me understanding the needs that a volumetric architect needs, and also for Peter to emerge the pre-construction, where basically construction is about logistics, correct? So we're playing a logistics game against a financial outcome. So we both believe as architects that the secret is in the drawings. And that's something that this industry lacks. The ratio of people that we have in our team is for every 1 brain thinking and drawing, we have 4 hands working. So if you don't have that ratio in your company of brains against hands, and you're not believing in digital twin, it's very challenging to spend money on robotics, roll formings, and equipment and try to get the return on investment when the brain is not there.
Part of what we're doing at Midrise, where Diego's team and in our shop, they're working down at a tolerance level of a 1/16 of an inch. Roll forming our own studs and joists. We have all the equipment, 100,000 square foot factory inside, 100,000 outside. So we have the capability of doing all these things. What we're doing now is also working with fellow architects. Typically, architects do not bring in another architect to work with them unless there's a small boutique firm and they need an associate architect. But in our case, we share our technology. We share our details. We share our fabrication capability, right? With the hope that these other folks will want to adopt it. We have no worries about being the so-called white label, okay, of what's being fabricated. We're behind the scenes. We're kind of almost hired as a consultant to the primary architect, much the way a structural engineer would be hired. And we sign all the NDAs and the non-competes. We're not interested in taking any clients from the other architects. We simply want to work with them and kind of float the industry boat together. We have plenty of work on our own. I can design. There's only so many buildings I can design, right? But the opportunities are brimming. There's so much going on right now, and that's where our efforts are focused. And we've been really fortunate, and in the last year and a half, to do some things that I didn't think were possible. But what has unlocked it is exactly that first point, that the ability to fabricate, and to fabricate, not just put it together, but to do it with a level of efficiency that does translate into all those great things in the world of modular being, speed, and quality. And things are getting very, very competitive in terms of pricing, but that speed and quality give you a return on your investment, I think, is unmatched by the other technologies. So I think that's been the biggest hurdle. I know that was a long answer to a short question, but that is what's been the hurdle for the last over almost 2 decades to find that. But now I believe I think we have it.
So tell me about your modular design process now. How does it start? And how has that process sort of evolved over time since you started?
Right now, what's happening, it's a little bit different than it was originally. Originally, we'll work with a client who comes to us. We'll show them traditional way to put the buildings together, and then we show them the modular benefits. And those clients will work with us directly. We will design that building, but my design work does not start in the traditional manner. Just about everything that's feeding my design palette has almost nothing to do with the design of the building per se. I'm worried about logistics. I'm worried about shipping. I'm worrying about the building rattling as it's being moved to the job site. And I have modules. How large of a module can I move down the street? And how big of a module can I pick up? How far can my crane boom out? I haven't spoken about aesthetics, creating a positive environment where people's lives are going to thrive. That didn't come into the picture yet. So what happens is I'm almost like a chef who's in the kitchen, and I have to figure out how all of these appliances and all this equipment works before I can really start mixing things. And that's also a hurdle for architects who are not in the modular world. They're not used to doing that, right? So there's a kind of relearning of the parameters by which you design. So that's part of our DNA now. That's something that's a natural extension of us. So when we're working on a project, it's rather easy for us to sit down with the client, hit the ground running, and really move forward. When it's another architect who comes to us, I think in general, architects are trained, they're problem solvers across the board. They're trained, they're educated to be problem solvers. And whenever someone comes to them with a project, yes, we do those projects. Can you do a gas station? Yes. You do single family homes? Yes. You do nuclear power plants? Yes, right? Because they know they have to solve challenges, and they're not scared to go after those projects. So when they come to us and they've designed a building and say, okay, we've designed our building in a traditional manner, can you make it modular for us? And I think, okay, if there was any level of discipline there and order and how the building is organized, it works. And other times you have to reconfigure things, and you kind of have to fit it into the ice cube tray per se. So the design phase can drag out a little bit, but typically the client is the one who will drive that. The clients are the one who go to the architects, listen, I want to dabble in this world of modular. Can we do it, and how do we do it? And those are the people we reach out to. So those architects who have those clients and say, let us help you. Let us make that part of your arsenal and your palette and your creative outlet. So the process, once those architects get up to speed on the know-how, they'll get it easily.
And then to add to that, the next step, what we do on our end is Peter is dreaming. We're telling him, hey, Peter, this is just a cookie. You can use the oven or the toaster. Don't be using that big oven because you're gonna kill the cost. So what we do for that is we believe in parametric models. So we'll take the architectural level even from the bidding stage. I usually tell people when they use Bluebeam or any of those softwares to do estimating, I call it finger painting. We don't finger paint here. We grab the house or the model or the building that we're doing, and we do a parametric Revit model. And out of that parametric model, we get all the data that is needed to be able to be efficient on the price. So that's how we price our buildings. And as we move forward on the contracts and on the deals that we're working with our owners, we have the ability to do these parametric models to make decisions on equipment, on size of the electrical panels and everything else, and have an immediate impact in the budget before we make any decisions and before we even buy an outlet. So I think that's where we complement each other, where Peter has the ability to dream within the needs of the budget. And then we come behind almost as an inspector, just making sure that at the end of the day it's feasible for the price based on what the project and the site is needed.
From an architectural point of view, and you both have brought up great points that go outside of the bounds of just pure architecture, but from an architectural point of view, are most modular projects similar, or the ones that you do, are they similar, or does each project sort of have a unique module design that requires starting from scratch?
Well, you can look at it both ways. I think if you're going to be more efficient in this space, you're going to want to come up with some standardization, because I think that's where the level of efficiency comes from. Can you do custom projects? Sure, but when that happens, most of the folks who are attracted to modular want to get things done quickly. They want to do things of excellent quality, and they're trying to do things of great value, a decent value prop in it all. Once you go custom, it falls back into the traditional world of doing things. Now, we have created a little palette. You know, we would love to be like In-N-Out burgers, right? Where they've got 3 or 4 options on the menu and that's it. But the intense amount of research and development has gone into creating that module, creating that standardized module, because you have to make some assumptions about how the masses of society want to live in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom or 3-bedroom apartment or something along those lines. And you make some blanket statements, but very often it's not about how we have lived in the past when we're designing, how do we want to live? And that becomes the drawing inspiration behind what we do, right? And then when you combine that with all those technical things we were talking about before, it becomes this heavily mixed level of aesthetics and technical prowess. And you cannot leave the technical out. And very often you say, listen, we'll design it and someone else will figure out how to build it, right? That never happens with us. And it's interesting that Diego mentioned, a parametric model. One of the benefits we have in our shop is we have this shop with roll forming machines and 30, 40 guys putting things together there. We have 6 or 7 project managers who are working exclusively in Revit, AutoCAD, and they put these models together, but they all started out on the floor of the factory. They all started out running the roll forming machine, fastening everything together, and they've all been with us at least 8 years. So that means that when they're at that Revit, table and they're inputting information, they know firsthand how it comes together. There's no disconnect between the people drawing and the people who are fabricating. That's massive. That's huge. That's why Diego and I got together. I said, Diego, you've got something going on that I haven't seen that I know is required. And I see it firsthand. And it's wild because I'll go into the factory and I'm feeding off of it as the architect. I'm seeing the way they're doing things, and that palette that I have is now getting bolstered, right? Because I can see how these things are put together in a more efficient manner. So I think that's pretty much how I've seen, development on it. And I know, Diego, what do you think in that regard?
I think just to add to this, yes, repetitious is the secret, correct? That's where you make the money. But if you try to use an 80-20 rule, 20% of the cost of those modulars is the bathroom, the kitchen, and all the MEPs. So we have standardized the MEPs and give the ability to the bedrooms, the world where I do panels, the size of the bedroom, the size of anything that is outside that 20%, control, be flexible. So we standardize our bathrooms, we standardize our kitchens, our connections, our MEPs, right where the money is. And then we let the architecture fly on the boundaries of the site, the boundaries of the building, the needs of the customers. But the core budget, or the core cost of the modular unit, which I'm in my understanding by doing numbers and looking at it, it's the bathroom, the kitchen, and all that area with all the connections are, we standardize and we create a palette for those. So we're trying to be flexible on the rest of the building and the standardized bathroom. And there's only so much you can do with them, an ADA bathroom, a regular bathroom. And then all you do is you change colors, sizes, but then you keep the main core of the building and you use that 80-20 rule.
Along those same lines, I'm going to add to that. Very often when I speak to fellow architects, if you're doing these modular buildings and they're of any large scale, And they usually end up looking like minimum security prisons. He said there's no flexibility in the design or the aesthetics. And what we've done is part of our entire approach is we integrate a unitized facade into our modules. That unitized facade enables us to swap out materials, the thickness of material, the color, all of that. That gives the building really its own identity. Things don't have to look like, you know, the building next door that we did 2 years ago. So we think we've achieved a level of variety that's kind of veiling all of that repetition where we leverage all the efficiency from. You know, we're working on a project now here in South Los Angeles with a developer, and it's Anthony Goudet. Anthony's Goudet Capital, and it's interesting because we put together this entire building, and then our modular elevator, which is typically just a shaft, has become this point where we have these shifting marquee shapes going around it all the way up this 8-story building. And it becomes the iconic image of the building. And it kind of steals the show. And all of a sudden, the rest of the building is fine. It's perfect. It's not boring, but you have this one aesthetic feature that really sets it off. And I think that's up to the architect. The architects have to take leadership on it to show what those possibilities are. Things do not have to be boring by any means. And you'll see that project eventually. It's quite nice. So I think, though, we would be lying if we told you repetition's not so important. We can do whatever you like. It's part and parcel to what we do.
With all the experience that you both have acquired, would either of you consider yourselves a specialist in modular design? I ask because it seems like many designers include modular in their skill sets. They'll do traditional, they'll do modular, but there are few, at least in my experience, who are truly specialists in the field. What are your thoughts on that? Do people need to specialize?
I'm going to answer that first, Diego. Diego is a specialist. I don't know anyone in this field, in that 2D panel world, that knows that industry and executes like he does. There's so many who've written books, white papers, giving lectures, and I've seen them all. But at some point, the rubber hits the road. And Diego, this is why I connected with him. But I went to the shop, they were doing it. And he's been doing it for 12 years. He's not been doing this for just last week because it became a cool, hip thing to do. Diego, explain how you got to this point, or maybe help John out with that, because I do believe you're the specialist. I know you're humble, not too often, but I think you'll be humble this time. So give him a general idea how you got to where you are and what it takes, so that the other folks out there who want to follow in your footsteps have some general path or some guideline on how to achieve that.
I think being humble it's the secret of being a specialist, correct? Because we learn on the nose. All the mistakes we make, you have to add it up. And I think a specialist is just an accumulation of mistakes who's brave enough to admit it and be able to pass it on to the next generation or the next people. So we have different rules in the shop. You know, we have a pull schedule. We do a lot of jobs with DPR, with, the big GCs, that they have different concepts, lean construction, pull schedules, and try to implement that. There's certain rules that we have in the shop. Who's at fault, the one receiving or the one giving? And our shop is the one receiving, because if you're receiving something that is not where it needs to be, don't move forward. Stop the line. We believe in drawings, simple things. The only way you move up in our shop is if you bring me somebody better than you to take your job. So John, if you come to me and say, Diego, hey, I'm tired of sweeping floors, I want to put some screws, you better bring me a guy that sweeps floors better than you in order for you to move up. So that has created a level of dependency on the team and also trust. I always say that there's a big difference between respect and admiration. Everybody respects the guy that writes the check. But if you start admiring your team and your team admires you, and you create this camaraderie, this group where the mistakes are just the result of our growth, is where things happen. I think that's what a lot of other things in the industry happen. And a lot of leaders will, I read something on LinkedIn this weekend, and I put a little comment where nowadays the best advisors are everybody else who has failures in the industry, because they weren't able to be smart enough to survive, because they bought their souls to capital because they needed more money. They buy all this equipment, even though they were smart guys. Here they are going out of business because you had to keep feeding the beast. So you have to see what your abilities are. So we're very cautious on the jobs we take. We're growing very steady but slow. Everything we owe is paid off. We don't owe money to anybody besides the rent and the electricity. So that being debt free and having the ability to dream and being challenged is what is allowing us to grow. Are we making millions of dollars? No, but we're paying our bills. Our people is paid, and it gives us the ability to think, which a lot of these new modular companies, by taking capital and money and raising funds, they don't have the ability to slow down and think.
Follow-up question for you, Diego. What education and development do young architects need in order to really get skilled with modular design? What paths should they follow to get their education?
You know, there's a saying that the professor shows up when the student is ready, correct? There's so much learning in the streets that are you really willing to pay the price? Are you willing to take that year sabbatical and go mop roofs, put screws before your ego of being an architect walks away? Or you're ready to pay, go do red lines for a firm, and all you do is you do red lines and you dream and you copy paste. So I think architects should have the ability to go to school. They should have the ability then to go to the job site. If you look how architects are raised in the rest of the countries besides United States, they actually get to build as soon as they're out. They go to the job sites. An architect here, because of legal circumstances, because I think construction is being ruled by lawyers more than architects and builders, you don't have that ability to spend so many hours because you're protecting yourself. You don't want to release your Revit model because it's not a construction document. And we're doing all these documents, and I understand it's a huge economy, it's a huge industry that everybody needs to protect themselves. But within the process of going to school, they should go to the job sites and learn. They should learn how to put a screw. They should breed what they're really building.
You mentioned when the student's ready to learn, the professor will arrive. I love that saying. I'm sure I just butchered it, but I think I paraphrased it well enough. How can architects who are experienced in modular design best share their knowledge with younger designers? Are there best practices? Are there methods that you've either done yourself or witnessed that you think work particularly well?
Like I told you, experiences and making mistakes. I also say that there's a difference between sweat and saliva. A lot of people have a lot of saliva, a lot of pictures. Architects have kind of two things, and I'll probably be offending architects, but they have the projects that pay the bills, and they have the projects that raises their ego because they get published in a magazine. But if you can find that middle point where you can teach the next generation of the mistakes and what you've done and share that and walk away from that ego that you're the architect, but assume the responsibility that it's okay to make a mistake, that it's okay to repeat itself. The problem is not to make the same mistake twice, hopefully, and then just lead. You have to lead. Leaders you're there to lead people. And you need to walk away from your own persona and build teams.
Peter, I want to follow up on something you said earlier about wanting to work with other teams. Are there any best practices you've discovered to help with that communication and idea sharing within a team of designers?
Sure. I mean, the communication channel is probably the linchpin in all of it. We're set up on teams. We actually work with an international team. We've got folks in Europe, engineers in Europe. We have architects in South America that are all part of our team. And when you have that type of distance and it's purely digital, that has to be really tight. In addition to that, you have standards with all of your drawings, standards that can be shared, libraries. And I think that's where most of the work goes into on creating the modular company. You have to create a library, you have to create an ordering system, you have to create these standards by which everyone's moving in the same direction, utilizing the same tools, same details. It's a language. It's like learning a new language. So that's one thing. The rest of it, I think right now, those folks that I told you, the project managers that we have on our Revit stations, we pulled them in and making each one of them an expert in a different facet of building. So we have one person now who's really specializing in just mechanical, another who's just electrical, plumbing, facades. So we're empowering them with this knowledge. So they're starting to see that how this all ties together, to a greater whole. And that has to happen at the same level when we work with fellow architects. We have to give them all that information. We have to give them the drawings. We have to share just about everything that we've created. If we hope to be on the same page with them, we have to share the playbook if we're going to move that offense down the field, right? So I think in many instances, it's just a matter of everyone getting on the same page so there's no miscommunication. And quite frankly, across the board, I don't know what the huge percentage is, but everything we are doing when it comes to the planning and the architecture and the engineering is to reduce the amount of errors in the field and to create some level of predictability in all of this. And the only way to do that is to share the information so that we're all on the same page. We do not have the luxury of putting that note at the top of our drawings as contractor shall verify all prior to construction and notify the architect if there are any problems, right? That doesn't exist in our world. So we're circumventing all of that because it has to happen before we even we pass it off to any other team. So we've had success with this. We work with a few different companies already that have embraced it, and now they've become modular. I don't want to call it specialists yet, but they're very friendly to it because they see those benefits that come with it.
And something that we've done is, walk away from the project managers and create product managers. So we have the product manager for MEP, for everything else. And we also have a theory here in the shop that the more we teach, the more you need us. So the more we share, the more you're going to need us, because we want to be a source of information. We want to be the ones doing the research. We want to be the ones hopefully helping architects so they can have their steady building, and let us take care of whatever happens inside the walls. Let us pay attention to the MEP, the outlets, the roof openings, the locations of your ADA bathrooms. Let us help you just redline everything else that has to do to make a more efficient and cost-efficient building while you keep the integrity of your design. So that's where we think we want to be that resource for architects, engineering firms, or anyone who wants to get into the modular world.
And John, you asked that question earlier about the students, and there's a few programs out there. I used to teach University of Texas, right? And University of Texas has a design build program there. And I can't remember the exact name, but it's run by a gentleman named Coleman Coker. There's another program at University of Kansas. It's run by Dan Rockhill. They have design build programs where the students are spending a semester building a residence or building some building, and the rubber hits the road there. These folks show up and they're not in, the cool architectural black turtleneck. They're in work boots and they've got tool bags and they're making it happen. And those folks, I've got to believe, have a huge advantage over the folks who are purely in the studio, right? Because they understand how critical it is. Actually, they probably learn more so what you don't want to do out in the construction site, right? And that feeds them to say, we need to resolve this problem before we get to the construction site. And how can we do that in the factory? So I would recommend any student who's really interested in modular, and you're in architecture school, that's a place where you would start.
Well, speaking of where students are learning it and how they're learning, are there any new tools, AI, for example, that you feel have the potential to change how designers deliver their projects that maybe these students are being introduced to now?
I think that a couple of things are happening. It's obvious that the AI is enabling us to do the macro work much easier. In other words, I can start to reconfigure buildings very, very quickly. Right? Simple little modules can be grouped and to take into consideration the sun, the angle of the sun, solar penetration, the neighbor's views, your views away from the building. All those things enable you upfront to configure your buildings more efficiently. But what I get a little nervous about, a little scared about, is that so many people are just going to rely on that machine to configure their building, and they're going to say, okay, my job is done now. Okay, and it's really easy to get wrapped up and be enamored with what's happening in the world of modular and modular construction. People are fascinated by it. Okay, but at the end of the day, it's a means to an end. It's really serving a larger purpose because we're creating spaces for human beings. And if that gets left out of the equation, I'm not sure how successful those buildings are going to be. And I've seen plenty of examples in the past where, yes, it's a shelter. You got a roof over your head. It doesn't leak. But I don't want to be in that space for longer than 20 minutes. Right? So this gets back to the minimum security prison phrase that I've heard, over and over again. When AI is able to take into consideration the cultural elements, how people live in that neighborhood, and all the other things that impact the quality of life there, at that point, I think it's great. In the meantime, we have to settle with the architects who see the world a little bit differently and make some observations, say, you know what, I've created an incredible contribution to this context, to this neighborhood, to this piece of property. So we are not against technology. I can tell you that much. We are deeply embedded in it. And I see it as a tool, just like everything else we have here. So we're embracing it.
Yeah, to add to what Peter's saying, I think the best tools, there was a fellow that actually Peter introduced me to. I never knew about him, Edward Deming. He was the gentleman who helped the Japanese reconstruct Japan after World War II. And he had a couple of good quotes. He said that without data, you're just another person with an opinion. Mm-hmm. So for AI to work, you need data. So like in our shop, we've been collecting data for the past 10 years, 12 years. So I know what Jose in the back numbers are when he's putting a number 10 screw and a 16 gauge to a 12 gauge piece of track. And now we're taking it to the next generation. We're trying to write an algorithm where you have 3 variables that you have to, take into account when you do modular. One is your schedule that you're going to deliver. The other one is the resources you have that day in the shop. And the other one is the procurement of the materials. So how do you know what panel, what stage to do next week and everything else based on the team, based on the people you have, and be able to leverage those resources to be productive and make money? So I think data is the secret for AI. AI would not work without any resources. He also had another good quote that he said, "In God we trust, all others bring the data." So a lot of the new shops are trusting in God or whatever you got is, but they're not trusting on resources and data and experience. And that's where the professor and the student and all this thing comes in, when there's knowledge and there's mistakes being made, and all that mistakes, all those information has been accumulated for the benefit of all. And you have to share that with everybody and be accountable for it.
There's a quote I use that the Stone Age didn't end because they ran out of rocks, right? This is coming. AI is going to play a more and more dominant role in what's taking place in our industry. And we're embracing it. I'm curious where it's going to be in a year from now, even 5 years from now. And I can't get my arms around it, but I'm genuinely excited about it.
Well, it seems like a good time. Conversation seems to have crescendoed in a couple of different ways. Tell me about the formation of Mid-Rise Modular and all the experience that you've brought to it, all the excitement, all the technology. What led the two of you to create Mid-Rise Modular, and what's your goal with the company?
A few things have happened here. I've been in that modular space almost for 2 decades, on and off. And then about 5, 6 years ago, I was fortunate to get aligned with a company called HBG Modular, which we created with the late Max Azria and a few folks here in Los Angeles. And they took my knowledge in the container world and sent me off to China and worked with a great team of people from the US. Was able to get our China factory approved by HCD here in Sacramento, state certified. And we created a bunch of prototypes and ultimately a 5-story apartment building here in Los Angeles. We did a homeless project here in Los Angeles and really took that portion of modular to a scalable level. Now, I have been involved primarily with boutique type projects, one-off houses, ADUs, things like that, but never something where it would have impact on the masses and really help the people who needed it most. So that company resulted in 3 or 4 buildings here in Los Angeles, and then went to another company hoping to work on the multifamily project that didn't work out. And I was in a spot where I said, gosh, I would really love to get back to this. And I ran into Diego. We were getting awards for the projects that I mentioned earlier at the World of Modular, and just hit it off with him and spend a whole bunch of time with him. And he explained everything that he was working on in the 2D panel world. And I said, this is exactly what we need in the 3D panel world. I need a production partner. I also spoke about that earlier. And once I got back to a shop and saw the culture that was there and the work that they were producing, I realized that this guy had solved the problem in the volumetric world that he wasn't even working on. He solved the problem in the 2D world. It was easily readapted into the 3D world. And in our discussions, Diego was telling me, listen, we want to make the jump in the 3D world, but we're not sure we don't know what you know. Okay. And it was kind of vice versa. I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have the resource to do what he was doing. So it kind of fit like a hand in a glove quite nicely. And then once we got together, I think that we realized that we had to continue on the path with the 2D panel world because we had a level of expertise there, but we slowly started infusing the volumetric vocabulary into everything and started to go after those types of projects. We did not expect to have 3D volumetric project likely for another 6 months or so, but we're working on a nice size 88 unit, 8-story volumetric project now. That's in combination with the panelized project that we're currently working on as well. And we find ourselves not just developing or building projects for our clients, but we're the white label to other fabricators. Much in the way that we would be the modular architect, the specialist in architecture for the traditional architect, we are now the intel inside for other fabricators. And that's a result of those folks seeing the same thing that I saw and what Diego had created in the 2D panel world. So I think we have a pretty diverse company. And I think that regardless of what's taking place, there seems to be always a demand for the panels. And now it's starting to take place, obviously, with the volumetric.
Yeah, and in my side, I got enchanted by all these ideas that Peter had as an architect. I still dream as an architect, even though we built things like today. And then when we talk and we see what was coming, especially living in the world of panels, living in the type 1 construction, assisted living, nothing in wood, everything above 5 stories, we're like, there's a big challenge here. The city of LA, in my prediction, is when the next 5 years is going to go non-combustible. So I don't think nothing within the metro area of LA is going to be able to be done in wood because the density is not going to allow that. Density would allow for non-combustible buildings. I've been living in the non-combustible buildings for the past 10 years. So when I saw that level of precision that we do in the panels, what the industry is doing in the future, where the market is going, the knowledge that Peter brings on the volumetric side, but most important thing, have already established business that pays the bills. So we don't have to go get a loan and get in debt to try to create a volumetric business. It was a no-brainer. So we create a subdivision to the existing operation. The existing operation is running on its own, paying the bills. While we're dreaming on the side, building this volumetric, Peter and I were going to take a year sabbatical just to learn and go across the world and see who's doing what. But, we just got pulled in and we got a project already, and the level of coordination and digital twins that we run in the other industry, it was secure enough for us to take this new challenge. And we're looking forward. I think it's going to be a great experience. We're crawling. Hopefully, by the end of the year, we'll be walking. I don't know if we're going to be running, but we'll be enough to survive while the panel business keeps growing.
Have there been any potholes or hurdles that you've had to navigate in the past year and a half with the beginning of mid-rise modular? Anything you didn't expect?
Well, they say it's a cliche, right? All these hurdles or all these problems prompt you to come up with other solutions, right? And the worst day can also be the best day, and that's happened in some regards. With I'll let Diego talk to you about our current facility and how we've shifted gears and now have taken on a new facility. I'm sitting in our new office today, and a year ago we were not even thinking about this at all. But there's some challenges that did pop up in that regard. The other things that are happening is there's some really pleasant things happening. You would think that the change in the code and the policymakers are getting far more friendly to what we're doing as modular builders. And we realized a very long time ago that you could be the most visionary architect in the world and have everything resolved, but the policymakers are so tied to what we're doing. And the ADU laws in California, the SB 9 laws, what Diego was talking about earlier with the non-combustible, it's all an attempt by the policymakers to have more density in existing cities instead of promoting sprawl and people moving further and further out into the suburbs. They're bringing people back to the inner city, and what that means is raising in tax dollars, right? And when all that happens, the buildings start changing. We're doing an 8-story building, 88 units. There's no parking, because we're within a half mile of a parking transit hub. That's major. Do you know what that does to the impact of the budget for the developer? And they're putting up 88 units now instead of 30. And I'm not saying that density is the answer to everything, but I'm telling you that we have to team and collaborate with these other players in order to make an impact, to make that positive impact.
Besides that, I think one of the biggest challenges too is having the banks and the financial world understand the cash flow that we're building like this, and that's what we're trying to still convince lenders. And even though the customer, the architect is on road, it's just the lender. How do you end up paying all this money up front, and you're acquiring all these materials and schedules, but they still want to run it as a traditional construction. So there's a difference right there between still having the mentality of traditional construction, but being able to have a cash flow and a different phase, which is manufacturing. So the line between manufacturing and traditional construction, I think, is where the biggest challenge is that we see. But once you get the right lender, once you get the right customer, and everything else is flowing, it's just a matter of cash flow, So what Peter's saying, back in November, we were challenged by the landlord where we're staying here in LA. We've been here for close to 14 years, paying very significant amount of money compared to what the neighborhood does. So he came back in November and said, "Hey, Diego, it's time to raise the rent." I said, "Well, I've been getting monthly increases for the past decade." He goes, No. Market rate is 4 times what you're paying. I was paying, I'll give you the number, I was paying 54 cents a square foot. He came back and said, "Hey, market rate is $2. I'm like, "What? $2? That's $200,000 a month for rent. Multiply that times a year, that's $2.4 million. So I was like, I said, "Okay, who in the construction industry makes 20% profit or maybe 10% profit, needs to sell $10 million just to pay the rent?" So we're like, "Peter, we're in trouble. What are we going to do?" So within people that we know, we're in the industry, we start looking south and went into Mexico, went into the Tijuana area. I know a couple of red iron manufacturers there who do chassis and structural steel who deliver to California. Worked the deal with them, did a joint venture, and we're actually in the process of opening our shop in Mexico where we keep a small operation in LA to manage the installation and the work of the 2D panel where we develop the volumetric. But, I keep thinking, you come to our shop, I have an American flag, made in America, very proud of building everything, but California is pushing us away, and as we go to Nevada and then keep going east, but the market is here. In all these new laws between Mexico and United States, where you still use 100% American products, you go across the border and you use nearshoring, and you're able to use some of their labor and bring back the quality of the products, complying with the same code, complying with everything else. It makes sense.
So in terms of projects, what's and you alluded to a couple before, Peter, but what's on the horizon for mid-rise modular over the next year or two? You mentioned an 8-story, another project. Do you have anything else in the pipeline, something you can talk about?
Sure. The panelized projects that we're working on to support the other fabricators are a big part of what we do. And we really excel at that. At the moment, we're doing some work in Hawaii. We're on short list to do student housing projects here with the UC system. We also have a series of folks who come to us with SB9 lots who are really dividing single-family residential zone property into four units now, and that's becoming almost like a repetitive cookie-cutter type of solution that can apply across the state of California. So we're creating that menu that we spoke about earlier, right? Where we have a solution where someone can come to us and get something right off the shelf, and they're ready to go. The other developers that we're working with, they don't just kind of go in and do one project with us, right? They're now presenting all these other projects because they see those benefits. And I don't want to say we're early stage, but we're doing some projects that are pretty big out of the gate. And we also don't want to run into a spot where we just take all the work we possibly can, we start compromising the quality or don't have a way to fabricate it, and we don't want to go the route of some of the other modular companies that have simply failed. Just gone out of business, could not keep up either with that workload, could not produce. While I found a solution on how to fabricate in a high quality level, you also have to respect how that machine runs, or you'll destroy what's so great about it, right? And I think Diego has a very healthy perspective on this. We have constant meetings about the workflow and the team that's putting everything together so that we're always producing quality. It seems to be at the core of everything that we're doing. So it would not surprise me if we grow slowly and steadily and continue to do excellent quality work. And I actually prefer it that way, So I think that's probably the vision for the next year or two, maybe even 2 or 3 years, where we'll work out every little detail we have so that when we deliver something, it's highly predictable, no change orders, and it's just beautiful quality project.
And to add to that, to Peter, going back to what I was telling you, being able to be debt free, it's allowing us to dream like this, correct? So what's in the pipeline in the panel business? We probably have a couple assisted living projects, probably in the range of 250, 300,000 square feet of buildings, where it's just panels. That's probably 15,000 panels between walls and floors. We're also becoming this white label for existing modular companies in the city who are choosing to become an assembler. They all think, hey, we're going to be Tesla, we're going to be Boeing, we're going to build modulars, and we're going to so we bought, we drink their Kool-Aid, we'll make them the best panel they need, and we supply with them. And now with the operation that we have in Mexico, we're also integrating all the structural steel and chassis. So we supply the chassis, we supply the walls, we supply the floors. They put it together, they do the MEP, they do everything else. And for us, all we want to do is give them the best panel they can have, So far, we deliver 88 units for this customer. We just signed a contract for 188, maybe 500 by the end of the year. And they're projecting 1,500 units by next year. So this is just building parts, kits of parts, of walls, floors, and metal chassis. And what they value in what we do is our level of precision. So if you don't know how to do the structural part precise, the box, the chassis, MEPs and all that, it doesn't really matter if the building is not going to come together once you build it. So our level of precision on the 2D panel and being able to accommodate this other modular companies who require, especially on the chassis, I think out of the LA modular companies, we supply to 4 of them. As a white label, I won't give you names or nothing like that, but it's an honor for us for them to respect our level of quality. We don't compete against them because we're a small modular company doing our own buildings, but we can be a great complement to their existing operation. So that's us allowing us to learn, to be humble enough to pay the bills. And we have our first project of our own that hopefully will be done by 2025. And then we'll see what happens from there.
Peter, Diego, thank you so much. Just clearly a wealth of knowledge and experience that both of you bring to mid-rise and to the industry, really. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Peter, Diego, if people are interested in getting in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can contact us at Mid-Rise Modular. It's at Diego@midrisemodular.com or DeMaria@midrisemodular.com. We're very active. You won't get passed off to a salesperson. We pre-screen, we say no to a whole bunch of projects that we know are just not conducive to what Modular brings to the table. And John, I just want to thank you because you're a great conduit to the entire industry, not the modular industry alone, but to the construction industry. And just to give us a forum to discuss and share what we're doing right now is important. We'll be talking about some other things we have on the burner with Team Prefab Center for Modular Architecture. That's part of our whole vision. And that's for another conversation, but we really do appreciate what you're doing and all the folks there at MBI. It's a great asset to our industry. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. Glad to have you guys as members, and I hope to see you at next World of Modular. I guess we'll be in Vegas next year, so hope to see you there.
Yeah, we should go to the one in Europe.
Oh, the one in Europe, absolutely. Brussels. I'll be there.
There you go. We may see you there.
All right.
Thanks again.
Hey, thank you, John.
My name is John McMullen, and this has been another episode of Inside Modular, the podcast of commercial modular construction. Until next time.